That breaking news is at the Kennedy Space Center. NASA announces a major overhaul of the Artemis program, and it includes a major change in the plan to put American boots back on the moon.
In 2027, 4 astronauts will board a spacecraft bound for the moon. Or at least that is what NASA wants you to picture. But what is actually happening is more complicated. Artemis 3 is not landing on the moon. The mission was quietly redesigned while most people were not paying attention. And on May 28, 2026, one of the 2 rockets NASA was depending on to pull this off blew up on the launch pad. Here is the full picture.
Good afternoon, I'm Sonika Dange. NASA's chief made that surprising announcement during a news conference this morning as part of a plan that he hopes will lead to more launches to the moon at a faster rate.
For years, the plan was simple. Artemis 1 would be an uncrewed test flight. Artemis 2 would carry astronauts around the moon without landing, while Artemis 3 would land people on the moon. But that plan was scrambled.
A lot of big announcements came out of that hour-long news conference. First and foremost, Artemis 3 will no longer be landing on the moon.
NASA officially announced in March 2026 that Artemis 3, now scheduled for 2027, will be redesigned as an Earth orbit mission to test systems and operational capabilities, with the actual moon landing pushed to Artemis 4 in 2028.
Previously, Artemis 3 was set to put humans back on the moon in 2028. Instead, Artemis 3 will launch next year, but its destination is low Earth orbit, where they'll have a better chance to test out 2 lunar landers, presumably by Blue Origin and SpaceX.
Instead of going to the moon, the Artemis 3 crew will launch into orbit around Earth aboard the Orion spacecraft, where astronauts will practice docking with the lunar landers being built by SpaceX and Blue Origin. It's a practice run basically. NASA Administrator Jared Isaacman compared this to Apollo 9, the 1969 mission that tested the lunar lander in Earth orbit before Apollo 11 went to the moon. The thinking is the same. Before you send people to land on the moon, you test everything in a place where you can still bring them home safely if something breaks.
And the good news is that we could even expect 2 lunar landers in 2028. Both Artemis 4 and Artemis 5 could launch astronauts on the moon.
The actual moon landing has been pushed to Artemis 4 in 2028, which Isaacman says will help the program meet its much bigger goal of building a permanent moon base worth $30 billion by 2036. Now, let's grasp just how big of a change we are talking about. Artemis 3 was not just another mission, it was the mission, the one the whole program had been building towards since 2017. People knew the name because it was supposed to be the moment humans returned to the moon.
Taking their first steps outside for their historic test flight.
4 brave explorers ready to ride the most powerful rocket NASA has ever launched. Engines lit. 4, 3, 2, 1. Booster ignition.
The Artemis 2 mission, which launched on April 1st, 2026, flew 4 astronauts around the moon and back. On board were Christina Koch, Victor Glover, Reed Wiseman, and Jeremy Hansen, who named their Orion capsule Integrity. It was a real achievement because it proved the hardware works. But the moment it ended, all the pressure shifted to what comes next. And what comes next depends on technology that has not been built yet, tested yet, or in this case, survived its last test. That technology has 2 names, SpaceX and Blue Origin. When NASA decided it needed a moon lander, it did something unusual. It hired 2 companies instead of 1. The idea was simple. If one falls behind, the other might be ready. If both are ready, the better, because NASA has options. That made sense on paper. But what it looks like right now is a lot messier. SpaceX was hired first, back in 2021, to turn its Starship rocket into a moon lander. Starship is the biggest rocket ever built, standing nearly 120 meters tall. The moon version is called Starship HLS, which stands for Human Landing System. It is powerful and still being developed after 5 years and billions of dollars. Starship HLS has completed several test flights and proven it can do some important things, like catching and reusing its booster rocket. But it still needs to prove it can refuel in orbit before NASA will trust it to carry astronauts. That refueling test has been pushed back multiple times and is now expected sometime in 2026. Whether Starship will be ready for the Artemis 3 orbital test in late 2027 is still an open question. Isaac Mann has publicly said SpaceX is behind on its lander development. That is a big statement given how much the whole program depends on SpaceX delivering. Blue Origin came in later, getting its contract in 2023 to build the Blue Moon lander. The version designed to carry astronauts is called the Blue Moon Mark II. It has a crew area where astronauts live and work during lunar surface operations. Mark II is planned to launch as part of the Artemis 3 mission in mid-2027, and NASA wants both it and Starship to practice docking with the Orion capsule to lower the risk before the actual moon landing. Blue Origin had been making real progress. NASA even shared photos of a full-size Blue Moon Mark II crew cabin that was delivered to the Johnson Space Center in Houston, so astronauts could train inside it and practice the exact steps they would follow on a real mission. And then on May 28, 2026, that momentum hit a wall. On the evening of May the 28th, 2026, Blue Origin was running a routine engine test at Cape Canaveral. This kind of test, called a static fire, is completely normal. You fire the engines while the rocket is still locked to the launch pad to make sure everything works before you actually fly. It is supposed to be the safe version, but this time it was not. Blue Origin's New Glenn rocket exploded during the test, rattling homes in nearby towns and lighting up the night sky in orange. The explosion destroyed the rocket and badly damaged Launch Complex 36, the only launch pad Blue Origin uses for New Glenn. The lower section of the 188-foot rocket caught fire first, then the upper section tilted and fell before the whole vehicle exploded as its methane fuel and liquid oxygen ignited together. When the smoke cleared, even the large metal structure used to move the rocket to the pad was gone. Nobody was hurt, but the damage to the Artemis program was immediate and serious. This is because Blue Origin's only launch pad could be out of operation until 2028, according to Isaac Mann. Isaac Mann called for a full government response to the explosion and pushed for finding an alternative rocket to carry Blue Origin's moon lander before Artemis deadlines are missed. In plain terms, the rocket that was supposed to launch the Blue Moon lander no longer has a working pad, and NASA is now trying to figure out what carries it instead. This is the worst time for this to happen. NASA changed Artemis 3 into an orbital test mission specifically to make the program safer before anyone tries landing on the moon. That plan assumed both landers could reach orbit. With Blue Origin's launch pad possibly offline until 2028, that safety plan now has a large hole in it. All of that pressure has now landed on SpaceX. If Blue Moon cannot fly on Artemis 3, Starship HLS is the only lander left. And Starship HLS is already behind schedule. Of everything that needs to work before humans land on the moon in 2028, one problem gets almost no public attention, and it might be the hardest one to solve. Both Starship and Blue Moon need a huge amount of fuel to fly to the moon and come back, more than either rocket can carry when it launches. So they came up with a solution, and it is called orbital refueling. This is where a separate fuel tanker spacecraft launches first, meets the lander in orbit and pumps fuel across before the lander leaves for the moon. This sounds straightforward, but it is not. To land on the moon and return to orbit in one trip, both Starship and Blue Moon will need multiple refueling flights in orbit. The fuels involved are extremely cold liquids that have never been transferred between spacecraft at this scale before. These fuels, liquid oxygen and liquid methane, are incredibly difficult to handle, even on the ground. In space, with no gravity and extreme temperature swings, they start to boil and expand almost immediately. Moving them safely from one spacecraft to another without losing dangerous amounts or damaging either vehicle has never been done at the size a moon mission requires. For Starship alone, NASA estimates that somewhere between 8 and 14 separate tanker flights may be needed to fully fuel the lander before it can head to the moon. Every single one of those tanker flights has to go right. Every fuel transfer has to work. The fuel has to sit safely inside the lander for however long it takes before departure. All of this before one astronaut steps aboard. SpaceX has been working on a fuel transfer test for over a year. It has been delayed repeatedly. The test is now expected sometime in 2026. If it works the first time, great. If it needs multiple attempts before NASA is satisfied, that pushes everything further back. The Artemis 3 orbital mission will also include testing life support systems, communications, propulsion, and the new spacesuits astronauts will wear on the lunar surface. All of that testing is meant to confirm everything works before anyone gets near the moon. But the fuel transfer test has to come first. You cannot test a lander that does not have enough fuel to run. If the fuel test works in 2026 and Artemis 3 goes smoothly in 2027, and an uncrewed test landing succeeds before astronauts board, then 2028 is possible. That is a long chain of things that all need to go right in the right order, with no major failures in between. The first space race was about pride, two superpowers trying to prove which one was more powerful. The moon was the prize. Once Apollo 11 landed, America took the trophy and the race ended. What is driving this new race is completely different and far more valuable. The south pole of the moon, which is exactly where NASA is targeting for the Artemis 4 landing and where China is also heading, is filled with water ice sitting inside craters that have never seen sunlight. That water is not just scientifically interesting, it is practically useful in a very direct way. Water can be split into hydrogen and oxygen. Hydrogen is rocket fuel. Oxygen is air to breathe. A water supply on the moon means future missions do not need to carry as much from Earth. The moon becomes a fuel stop, a base, a launching point for missions heading further into the solar system. Getting to Mars becomes far more realistic if you can refuel at the moon instead of carrying everything from Earth's surface. The country that builds permanent infrastructure at the South Pole first gets to set the rules. We are talking about landing zones, resource access, and even agreements about who operates where. Everything that follows gets shaped by whoever arrived first and stayed. Then there is helium-3. The moon's surface has been hit by solar wind for 4.5 billion years, and that wind has been depositing helium-3 into the top layer of lunar soil the entire time. Helium-3 almost does not exist on Earth because our magnetic field blocks the solar wind before it arrives. The moon has no such protection. Scientists estimate there is around 1 million tons of helium-3 sitting in lunar soil. And here's the thing about helium-3. It is considered one of the best fuels for nuclear fusion, which produces massive amounts of clean energy with almost no radioactive waste. The estimated energy value of that helium-3 is in the hundreds of trillions of dollars. NASA is targeting early 2028 for the first crewed moon landing and is building toward a long-term human presence on the lunar surface as a stepping stone for eventual missions to Mars. China is not waiting. Its lunar program has publicly committed to landing astronauts on the moon before 2030 and beginning construction of a permanent base at the South Pole shortly after. Chang'e 7 is already on its way to the South Pole to look for water ice. Chang'e 8 will follow to test whether moon materials can be used to support humans without constant resupply from Earth. These are funded missions with hardware already being built. NASA's revised timeline still puts the United States ahead of China, but the gap is not wide, and it is not guaranteed to stay that way. A launch pad destroyed by an explosion, a lander behind schedule, and a fuel transfer technology that has never been proven at scale are exactly the kinds of problems that shrink a lead very fast when a serious competitor is pushing hard from behind. This is not 1969. Nobody is racing to plant a flag and fly home. This is a race to build, to stay, and to control the most valuable piece of territory beyond Earth for the next 100 years. So as you can see, it's a whole bunch of obstacles, but none of that means 2028 cannot happen. NASA has solved harder problems. SpaceX has a track record of pulling through, and real competition has a way of pushing people to move faster than they thought they could. If you want to stay ahead of what is actually happening in the new space race, subscribe and stay close. Share this with someone who thinks the moon landing is already sorted. The details matter. And right now the details are getting very interesting.